Hello again, everyone. My name is Pamela Grant, and I am the facilitator and strategic advisor for the Independent Police Oversight Review. This is our first public consultation in the North, and we wanted Thunder Bay especially to be our first stop. We've been here for a couple of days, and we're looking forward to this evening's public consultation. And what I'm going to be doing tonight is facilitating and moderating, but my team, just here to the left with Justice Tulloch in the lead, will be speaking briefly for the first 15 or so minutes. I want to just remind you that this is an informal gathering, so as you need to get more to eat, more to drink, please help yourselves, and you know that the washrooms are down the hall just before you get to the location where the meal is. I will say no more at this point, and I'll introduce Justice Tulloch, and he can say a few opening remarks, followed by Daniel Dowdy, who will take you through the evening's agenda.
Thank you, Pamela. Good evening, and thank all of you for coming. My name is Michael Tulloch. I'm a judge on the Court of Appeal for Ontario. And back in the end of April, I was asked by the Ontario government to conduct an independent review of 3 civilian oversight of police and bodies, the SIU, the OIPRD, and the OCPC. The SIU is the Special Investigative Unit, and that's a body that is tasked with investigating police officers when they're involved with citizens and a death and or serious bodily injury occur or a sexual assault allegation arises. The OIPRD is a body that's tasked with investigating conduct on behalf of public complainants, conducts of the police, that is short of criminal conduct, but conduct that can be resolved by a disciplinary proceeding, usually under the Police Services Act. And the OCPC is a body that it's both an adjudicative body and a oversight body that deals with chiefs of police and police services boards. So those are the bodies that we're here to look at. We're looking at these bodies specifically with respect to their transparency and their accountability. We all know that unless the public has confidence in the institutions that we're all subject to, then, you know, we cannot have true order and democracy. And so the police, that is a part of our community and our society, that is tasked with keeping law and order in our society, they operate at the behest of the confidence that we all have in them as citizens. And so we have these oversight bodies to ensure that all of their conducts are within the ambit of the law and within their duties. We're here to hear from each and every one of you, to hear from you with respect to your perspectives, to hear from you with respect to what you feel, you know, are important issues that we as a review should address as it pertains to these particular bodies. Before I go any further, though, I want to acknowledge that we are here on the traditional territory of the Fort William First Nation. And I say that, you know, because it's very important for us to acknowledge the First Nations and the indigenous peoples who were the first people of this part of the world, of North America, and certainly of Canada. And so we acknowledge them this evening. It's going to be a very, as you've heard from Pamela, it's going to be, we want this to be an informal discussion. We want it to be a free-flowing discussion. We want you to feel free to voice whatever your concerns are, positive as well as negative, because we want to hear from you. And I can assure you that whatever is said will be considered by our team. I'm here not by myself, but with a team of experts that are assisting me on this review. We have, as you've heard, Pamela, who's one of our chief facilitators. She's got over 35 years in working with policy from both the government and community perspective. We have Jamie Kluklech, who's a senior lawyer and Crown Counsel. He's got close to 30 years experience. Beside Jamie, we have Daniel Robitaille, who is a defense lawyer and who is very experienced in dealing with issues under the Police Services Act, as well as understanding individuals' charter rights and legal rights as it pertains to criminal law. And beside Daniel Robitaille is Daniel Dowdy, who is an expert in community engagement, and she's providing strategic advice also from the police's perspective. And to my left is Jodalyn Waterlove, and Jodalyn is a senior lawyer from the policy branch of the Attorney General's office, and she has a very vast amount of experience in both policing issues as well as Indigenous issues. And to her immediate right is one of our research lawyers, Matthew Parker. So we have a strong team of people who are assisting us in this review. And if you've read our mandate, we have until March 31st of 2017 to complete our report and to report back to the government. This is a very broad consultation. We have had a number of public meetings already in the Toronto area, and we're going throughout the province of Ontario. This is the first public meeting in the north, but we will be going to Sudbury and Sault Ste. Marie. We'll be going to Ottawa, Kingston, London, Windsor. So, you know, it's a very broad perspective. We're meeting with members of the public, members of various racialized communities, as well as members of various police stakeholders. So I'm not fixed on any particular view. I want to hear from a very broad perspective of people so that we can, you know, come up with the best possible solutions and make the best recommendations that we can. This is an opportunity for us as Ontarians to address these issues and to be, in my view, leaders in North America. So thank you very much for coming, and I look forward to hearing from all of you.
You could do it from your mic.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Danielle Dowdy, and I'm just going to go over really quickly the agenda for this evening. You should all have these forms on your table. It's just our little cheat sheet. Justice Tulloch went over what the three bodies are and what they're about, so I won't do that. But if you do need more information, you can just have a read there. And these three bodies are the bodies that we will be discussing in this review, and it's the three bodies that we want your opinion on. Just as a disclaimer, our review, we will not be looking at past cases or opening up and revisiting past judgments. We do want to hear your stories, and they are very important to set an important context for our review, but we will not be revisiting specific or individual cases, so just so that you're all aware of that. In terms of this evening, so we just did a really brief introduction. We're going to get into a roundtable discussion. There are questions at your table, and we're going to ask that you discuss amongst yourselves and work through the questions. If you are seated at the table and you're just a single person at a table, we're going to ask if you can join another table so that you can have the discussion on the questions. And following that, we're just going to do a report back where you let us know what your answers were to the questions, and also include any information that you want us to have. Si vous souhaitez écouter en français, un interprète traduit, vous pouvez prendre des écouteurs à l'arrière de la salle. Et notre interprète s'appelle Violaine. And we're also on social media. And so if you are on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram and would like to follow us or would like to comment or share, ask questions, that's where we are. You can also go to our website and get regular updates. We will be tweeting this evening and going forward, so you're able to follow us along at #IndependentReviewON for Ontario or BeHeardON, and follow us along, join in on the conversation. Thank you so much.
I'm just going to add a little bit in looking at the last two icons. For those of you who are unable to give all the information that you feel you want to give this evening, or there's some information that you feel perhaps you'd rather put into writing, the opportunity to go online and to policeoversightreview.ca. That's our website, and on there you will be able to actually email in your comments or submit comments. And of course you can use social media, the 3 social media options to comment as well. And that's an important thing, because I think once you've had some time to reflect, there may be some things that you'd like to add as well. And we will be accepting those comments and written submissions up until mid-November. So that's an important piece for you to also tell your friends and colleagues who weren't able to be here tonight. So I see one table with one individual at it. Are you? Okay, that's fine. Has everybody got the questions? Have you identified the question sheets that should be on your table? All right. With interest in time, we really would like to stick to the agenda in terms of 45 minutes of discussion and giving ourselves a full hour for reporting back. And I will be checking time with you. We also, as a staff team, will be circulating the tables and listening in and there to answer any questions that you may have in terms of the discussion, not necessarily questions to be answered about cases or that sort of thing. So I'm just going to say, if everyone's comfortable at the tables that they're at, that we're going to start our conversations at the table to answer the questions, and I will be around, as will Justice Tulloch.
And our whole team are going to
Yes.
moving around
We'll be
different tables to help facilitate the discussions.
Okay. Are there any questions before we start? We're good? All right. 45 minutes starts now.
But we're really honored to have in this table people from different backgrounds. We have a member of council in Thunder Bay here. We have a member who was a practitioner, facilitator with respect to mediation in some of the issues that abound. We have 3 First Nation people here, and they were able to articulate their own experience and the experiences of their places. And we have from the Multicultural Association and Diversity. So, and then there's me. So, the thing I'd like to say is we covered a whole bunch of things, and I'm trying to simplify it and give you the headlines of the things that we spoke about. And it's not in the order that it was presented, nor is it in the order of importance, but to try and get a logical take on the issues that came up. There was the mention of legislation in which we contemplated that a lot of the issues of these agencies which were made came about because of legislation. And the question arises, and something maybe we should look at, is whether the legislation itself is flawed. The reason for that is that within the implementation of the bodies and the work that they do, we heard an instance or a case in which you go to the police, you fill out your forms and so on, and then it goes to a mediator. But somehow or the other, the police get back into the mix and want people, prevail upon them to withdraw their complaint. The question is, what's the motivation? And more importantly, not only on this but other issues, what are the consequences or penalties for such behavior? I'm not aware, or at least we are not aware, that this type of consequences or the result of bad behavior is put out in or penalties is put out in the legislation. And so the question then comes up of power and impunity, in which people are able to do things and yet there are no consequences from them. So as a result, there might be some thing your commission could look at in your recommendations, that we seriously look at more complete legislation. The other issues were that of, and again, it comes to the question of impunity, in which people would die in jail under very suspicious circumstances, and the matter is just swept under the rug and nobody hears anything about it, especially in First Nation communities. So somehow, and this is my opinion, that we have to get a level playing field with respect to how First Nations people are treated, as well as other people in the community when something as final as death, and there could be no proper answering or no proper accountability on that. The question of violence, we spoke about the question of training and the services offered by the police and the training that the police get. The problem is, though, there should be some contemplation as to how policemen are picked or chosen, because unless we have someone who has the capacity for critical thinking and for, I'll say, humanity, it doesn't matter what kind of training you give. If there's endemic bias in that person before they come on the force, it'll be very difficult to then train that out of them. I don't know the sociological terms for that, but basically it's easier to start off well than to try and modify behavior, which is very difficult. And again, the question of consequences come about. what happens when they do misbehave. There was some, and we wish that there was some clarification, or at least we all expressed some knowledge of the SIU, but not so much were we really aware of the OIPRD or the OCPC. We simply have to be more educated to find out what these people really do. We see the SIU because it's always in the paper, but these other institutions that seem to act not as a repository for the complaints and the resolution of them, but often they act as a conduit to get it off to another agency, which is even less transparent than they are, as was pointed out. Are there any other points, headlines that I should mention? Yeah, of course, there's...
Did you want to take the mic?
I mean, the problem is what we discussed also, that the problem is complex, right? That you have, we have systemic issues that need to be dealt with, right? That it's not necessarily just the police that we need to focus on, but the police happen to be visible, and then we pay attention to that. But the systemic problems, I mean, whether racialized or sexism or classism, are embedded in the system, and there is the history also that come into play. And at the same time, you know, as reps of the system, we try to, and the institutions are modeled after democracy and equity and rights and justice and the rest of it. But we're impacted by the biases that exist or are embedded in the system. So, so that needs to be evaluated. You know, and then what needs to be evaluated, I mean, we had discussions about this, is that by and large, I mean, the system focuses on those that are on the margin of society anyway, right? So that, and then that can be quite problematic, you know, in terms of who in the end is going to be dealt with and so on. And of course, the treatment often, it's not necessarily of our police anyway, and I think a lot of the police members probably will strive towards what I was referring to in the context of democracy. But things are not that easy without addressing these issues of pertaining to biases, and as well as, you know, maybe training. If we're talking about training at all, the training has to be referred to with respect to critical thinking and reflection in the first place anyway. Not the training in terms of, well, okay, let's do a bit of training and that's it. Now we're okay, we know what we need to know and all we need to know and so on. So, I mean, it is quite complex. It's not easy. And we need to get to the root cause of a particular problem, obviously. And that's not that easy either, rather, right? Yeah, we had that discussion. Anyone else want to add, I guess?
It would appear that that's all I have. We have to say at this point, but I'm sure that...
Thank you, Louis, and thank you, Carrie. If you could pass the mic over to Steve, just behind you, Jody Lynn. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I should locate myself. I'm fairly new to Thunder Bay. My wife is Dr. Cynthia Wesley Eskima, who's now the chair for Truth and Reconciliation for Lakehead. And we both moved here for a specific reason, and that was to contribute something, give back something to the North. We both have extensive backgrounds and experience and a career in what Cynthia calls changing the face of Aboriginal Canada. And I want to start by, first of all, acknowledging my partners here. This was a courageous, a really respectful conversation. It wasn't easy. So you have a 35-year social worker and two police officers who there were some difficult conversations, and I think we're in a place. Thunder Bay is a place where these conversations have to happen. We know that we're like this idea of reconciliation and the truths that go along with that aren't easy to address, and how do we have these conversations? So I first want to thank you for being open and frank and allowing me to ask some of the things I said to you. I didn't think, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to go out and cover up my license plate. But I think that when you look at these questions, or you look at the idea of oversight, one of the things I said, I just explained, I'm 61 years old, and I'm a social worker. I had to go back and do a master's of social work so that I could become a registered social worker with the College of Social Workers and have liability insurance so that if I mess up as a social worker, clients can sue me. So there is a reality that there's a lot of Aboriginal people having to go and get that credentialed, get that education, get ready for assuming those roles. And in my career, you talk about have you had experiences with the SIU, and that's the extent of what I knew. I actually at one time tried to get on the SIU, but they weren't. We won't talk about cultural competency stuff. Yeah, that's another story. But the need in Thunder Bay for space, safe space. Some of my work was on cultural safety. That was my graduate work, is on cultural safety. So how are we going to have conversations that are inevitably political? It's a very political conversations that are going to unfold. We just had we're going to have the missing and murdered inquest coming to town. We just finished an inquest, and it opens up some wounds. And I think for the reason I'm here and why we want to be part of this is that it's going to take a lot of hard work by dedicated people to make things work in a way that changes the outcomes and improves. And remarkably here we have, I don't know, one sorry, what to say about, we have a senior police officer and a young police officer. And one of the things that would have to be acknowledged is that transition, and we have a responsibility as older people to create a path for the younger workers, and we can't paint everybody with the same brush. And the first question I asked was, what do you, that we know that not all police officers are bad, but what do you do about the bad apples, or the ones? And so those are why we're all here. We don't. Nobody wants to protect people that are doing harm, and whether it be social workers, whether it be judges, whether it be lawyers, whether it be, so there's yeah, I can tell you stories too about that. But yeah, so there's not a lot I want to say about but I think this process is important, that we do this, because one of the things that I heard in one of my journeys from Mary Simon, who's a remarkable Inuit woman, and she said that we spend a lot of time developing in processes. We develop all these processes, but we don't always invest enough time in the relationships it takes to make them work. So all those things we talk about is where are the Indigenous representation, and the patience it's going to take, because a lot of Indigenous people are just now getting the kind of education. We're just now getting safely into institutions. We're just getting them. We're just changing the way things are taught, the way things are done, and so we're in this intermediate period. We're going to need these conversations, and so yeah. Now go on. Thank you.
Thank you.
I meant to start with when we greet. I'm Mohawk. I'm Mohawk in Ojibwe territory, so it's like, oh. I gotta tell you, yeah.
Okay. Steve,
Yeah.
would you mind passing the mic over to Bob, just beside you? Thank you.
Good evening. If it's okay, I'll sit down and address the panel and the group here. Completely self-appointed. Welcome to Thunder Bay. It's a great city, and if you get a chance to check out the North Shore Lake Superior, it is one of the most beautiful places in the world. and you'll really enjoy it. It's part of the traditional lands of Fort William First Nation, which extend well beyond to the west and along the North Shore, so it's definitely worth a visit. And please come back. We do appreciate when folks from Toronto think about us. I'm a lawyer, and I'm going to try to answer the questions that you put, but I have to give a little bit of context, and I apologize that some of it is personal. I moved up here from Toronto about 35 years ago, being persuaded by my wife that it was a great place to live, and she was 1,000% right. And when I got here in practice, I brought with me my usual Toronto prejudices about police, that they were sort of hard-nosed and hard on people, and they were unfair, and all those usual things that some people seem to believe about police. And I was fortunate in my early part of my practice to since there was only one woman lawyer in town when I got here, I somehow got hired by a number of women's advocacy organizations to become an advocate for victims of violence, to take civil cases to trial, to work with agencies that advance the protections for women and children, particularly victims of violence. And I also got to start, through that connection, started to act for some Indigenous organizations, which were wonderful to work with, and have continued doing that. And I consider it advocacy, even though it's not sort of the really sexy stuff like land claims, but it does tend to be the stuff that allows First Nations agencies to work. And then out of the blue, I got a call to put in my bid to do some work for the police. And I thought, wow, is this going to be a different change in life? And it was. And the question number 2 is, have you had any good or bad experiences with the police? Before I started advocating for them, I actually sued them a few times and thought they didn't do a very good job, and I saw that side of perhaps not treating the public as well as they could. But then just walking down the street in Thunder Bay, I saw officers effecting arrest politely but firmly, trying to stop some intoxicated driver from smashing his truck into the side of a building, which he had already done 3 times. And I was impressed by the firmness but the fairness of that officer, and that made me think. Then I started doing some work with the police, and I found that really made me think. And I began to regard my job as prosecuting bad police officers, but defending good ones, and I became convinced and satisfied that the latter there's a lot more good ones than the bad ones. But the bad ones, the bad apples, do need to be dealt with, and fairly, but also firmly, so that we have a police service that people can respect. Now, there's sort of a bit of a story here. That getting to the good or bad experiences with the police, I'd like to recount to you a very good experience I had just in the last couple of weeks, and with what's been happening with our police in the public fair in the last several weeks in Thunder Bay, or maybe the last several years. Maybe that's an odd occurrence. I had the benefit of attending a group of 28 women and 2 men. I was one of them, meeting with the Minister for Women's Issues, Honorable Patty Haidu, who was doing a sort of a roundtable on violence against women initiatives. And just went around, much like this process here, went around the table asking people, have you had any good experiences with the police? Is there anything that works? Actually, just good things that work in helping victims of violence. The first 2 spokespersons, one was and I won't identify them, but the 2 very powerful women speakers, one head of a large Indigenous persons agency, the other the head of an organization that protects women. Both said the biggest improvement that they have seen in the last 10 years was the domestic violence unit recently created by Thunder Bay Police Service under the leadership of Chief Levesque. They commended the way that women's organizations could talk to these folks. The police officers were trusted. And I can assure you that was not the case when I started my practice 30 years ago. The relationship between the women's organizations that I acted for and the police was one of significant mistrust. And here we had, in a meeting, 2 very powerful statements that some things can be done, and particularly they focused on the communication between the women's organizations and the police, the fact that they knew each other, they trusted each other, and once the police officers who came in civilian clothes into the agency to offer their assistance to victims of violence, those people, the clients, not just the staff had grown to trust these people, but the clients, because the staff trusted them, the clients trusted them. And that was a huge step forward from something that happened about 30 years ago. And I think it is a dream of us all that someday in Thunder Bay we'll be able to say that the First Nations organizations, which have a difficult relationship often with the police, that there will be that healing and that reconciliation that can allow positive things and positive experiences to be experienced by everybody in society, whether they're from a racialized population or whether they're from the sort of post-European colonial society, whatever. People need to have the police reflect their city. And I do take issue when some person challenges me, says, well, why are those Native people why do they get to catch all the fish and we don't get to catch all the fish? And I just advise people, you've got to study history, you've got to understand the treaties, but you've also got to understand how those treaties were interpreted by the Supreme Court. Then you will get to know why certain people have certain rights and responsibilities. Not always the same, but they're lawful, and it is something that warrants complete respect. I also suggest to my First Nations colleagues that when we hear, oh, Thunder Bay is just a racist town in the bush, I invite people, and I won't give you my history speech here, but I invite people to study the history of this town and to understand why we elect people like Patty Hajdu and not people like Donald Trump. If that's the best public opinion poll that I know is who this town as a whole supports. And I think there's more good people here than bad people. There's more good police officers than bad police officers. And a system that encourages transparency. I'm now, Mr. Chair, Mr. Justice Tulloch, I'm now going to try to address your questions, finally. Would I encourage people to report things if they've had a bad experience with police? Absolutely. There are systems in place. There are people that are of good faith that want to make things work. But we do need to have some guidance for the people that they're victims of violence, victims of whatever they're victims of. They obviously don't have much of a trusting relationship with the police. I think people that can help them navigate through that system would be a great help. Do I think the police oversight agencies are open enough about their investigations? And again, all these opinions are completely my own. We just came here to spectate, and I got instructed by a Madam Facilitator up there that I must report from this table. And my colleagues here, these friends at the table, new friends, are from the SIU, so they obviously can't talk, or won't. So I've been dragooned into doing this, and I'm pleased to try to wrap up here. Anyway, should our police oversight agencies open enough about their investigations? Well, investigations, in my experience, can't be done under sort of with the Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail and the CBC sort of watching over every step. Investigators have to have some privacy, but at some stage, openness and transparency is important. What information do you think the public should know about after an SIU investigation? And I will confess I'm not quite sure on that one, but I have one sort of connected thought on this, and that is I understand that the OIPRD takes the position that even if it exonerates a police officer and says there was no merit to that allegation, that Section 95 of the Police Services Act prevents anybody from talking about that. So you can't, the police officer continues to look to the CBC website and see that their service is being alleged yet again for the misfeasance, and knowing that it's been investigated and that there's nothing to it, nothing that warrants going ahead. And that's not always the same test, but sometimes there's nothing to it. Sometimes it's unsubstantiated. We all know those are different standards. But if the SIU report is anything similar to the OIPRD's position on that, I think that's a problem, and maybe a synopsis or some fair, modest public comment is better than just nothing at all. Should former police officers work as investigators at the SIU and OIPRD or OCPC? Again, I don't bring any particular expertise to answering this question, but I'm allowed to speak on behalf of my table. If not them, then we wonder who. I mean, you want trained investigators. You want people that are capable and trained and competent, and I don't know who you will just invite somebody who's not trained. I don't know that wouldn't help the prosecution. It might help the defense. In any event, I think what you're doing here, Mr. Justice Tulloch and panel, is important work, because it clearly will lead to, we hope, more trust, just as the example I gave of trust between women's organizations and trust between women's organizations and police. I think more transparency will encourage trust between the public at large, particularly in Thunder Bay, the indigenous population, and the police. Particularly advocates are needed to help stick handle the way through the system for people. Often it's lawyers, but sometimes people that can just demystify the situation, maybe perhaps analogous to what victims assistance people do in the criminal court. In any event, thank you for your interest in what we have to say in our tiny town, and please take a chance to enjoy your stay here.
Hello. First of all, thank you very much for coming to Thunder Bay and getting the opinions of Thunder Bay residents. I know it's not in your your order in council, but there's one oversight body I think that the government has forgotten about, and that is the Police Services Board in all municipalities, because they are supposed to actually be the civilian oversight of police service in the municipality. I think it's something that should be looked into, and there is no, I don't know who has jurisdiction on the Police Services Board. I think it's the OCPS or, you know, OCPC. I'm familiar with them when they were OCOPs, eh? So, yeah, I think they should be part of this discussion.
Well, we do have a mandate to review
Okay, well, you know, because they do review police complaints. The police board is mandated to do that, I believe. Anyhow, so that's something I would like to see. But anyhow, yeah, Thunder Bay has no regional representation by any of these oversight bodies. I do not believe. There's no one here. I don't know if they did. If the SIU did get somebody in Dryden to be representing this area, I think maybe back in 2004 they may have, but there is no regional office here. At one point they actually shut down the Trans-Canada Highway for a few hours before somebody from Toronto came up, or was it from Sudbury or Sault Ste. Marie? I can't remember at the time. But I think they may have appointed someone in this area. But we do not have a regional office by any of these oversight bodies. These oversight bodies are basically unknown in Thunder Bay because the media do not make incidents high profile. Just lately, we are seeing on the CBC, the OIPRD is taking issue with a situation here for, I guess, the indigenous youths that were found in the river or died. And also there's one case that's being really high profile, Mr. DeBungy, I guess. And the sad fact is, though, is, that's sad to actually report on this, is that there was no lawyer in Thunder Bay who was willing to take his case that he contacted. So actually he went to Toronto and he got Julian Faulkner to represent him. So we thank the gentleman for coming up to Thunder Bay and setting up an office here. It's pretty pathetic to hear that in the media. It's frustrating. Well, while we recommend the public to file complaints with the oversight bodies, the OIPRD is a tiger without any teeth. You might have heard that in your first forum, because you cannot have police investigating police. When I met with Patrick Lesage back in 2004, I guess at the time, police complaints were handled by the police. Mr. Harris changed the legislation. Before, we used to file with the OCOPs, but then Mr. Harris said, let the police take care of it. And then Mr. Lesage was mandated, as you are today, to overview the oversight bodies to bring in a complaint system, and that was the creation of the OIPRD. But unfortunately, the OIPRD, I heard 80% of the cases, gives the complaints back to the police service to investigate. How can you have police investigating police? It doesn't work. You might as well have criminals investigating criminals. Oh, thank you. Oh yeah, the SIU does list its cases on its website, or it used to. I haven't been there for a while. And I think the public, 1 minute, at least they used to. Yeah, and the public is finally being made aware of the OIPRD, but I guess we're not familiar with any of these. The majority of people in Thunder Bay, you tell them who the OIPRD, they don't know. You tell them who OCOPS is, or OCPS, whatever their abbreviation, their acronym is now, no idea. And the SIU, yeah, they did a very good job. And, well, they're doing a good job. And should retired officers be involved with the SIU? Yes, they should be, but as I hear, the mix of full-time investigators is 50-50, thanks to Danielle Dowdy, who informed us of that day, which is good, but their part-time officers are a full complement of retired officers. So maybe they should have a little better mix there. Maybe make that 50-50 as well. Yeah, overall, yes, I'm not done. There's one more thing, though. Oh, yes. The OIPRD. Actually, I do have a complaint with against the Thunder Bay Police Service presently. I filed it with the OIPRD back in May. The police investigated it, so now I'm asking for a review. Well, the review is being handled by our Police Services Board, but there's nothing in the legislation that states when they have to respond to me. They may never have to respond to me because it's not in the legislation. So we need some change in that. That's why it's important for the, I guess, the police services boards to be investigated, to take a look at them, Yeah, and that's basically, I don't know, unless my colleagues here have something to add. I'm not going to have no preamble on anything else, but I'll try to get to the nitty-gritty.
Ever since I heard Mary Veltri speak on restorative justice, I can think of nothing else. You should too.
I only heard about this inquiry today on the radio. I wished I would have heard about it earlier. I guess, is this working? Okay. I guess my first experience with abuse by the police was in grade school. I was falsely accused and punished. My parents were never notified. I did a 5-day sentence in the school. Anyway, in recent years, starting in 2010, I wrote the Attorney General informing him about perjury and fraud on sworn court documents by employees of Legal Aid Ontario. They wrote back and said that he had no authority over legal aid. Well, if the top cop of the province has no authority over legal aid, a taxpayer-funded organization, we're in a sad ethical state, moral decay, okay? This has gone on. I do a motion on mens rea, intentional perjury, and I am punished by the judge. I am never allowed to bring forth my affidavit evidence. I'm not allowed. And then we go to a cost hearing, and I'm punished $3,800 for daring to bring a motion against a lawyer that committed perjury. This all started in 2010. The first 3 lawyers were paid for by the taxpayers of Ontario. The third lawyer did a motion of contempt against me without serving me papers, okay? My girlfriend had a gut feeling that we had better go to the courthouse here on Thursday, which is family court day, and here she was. Boy, you want to see a law clerk running around with her head cut off when I walked into the courthouse, okay? Likely they would have had me arrested for contempt. Contempt of what? Oh, refusing to pay $3,800 of court costs, okay? And this saga has gone on and on. I had a full-blown family court trial last year. 2 judges had me in motions court every Thursday for 7 weeks before the trial. Here I am trying to self-represent because I've wasted $25,000 in 2 lawyers already. How could I prepare? I got my trial record 5 days before the trial, okay? The rules of family law say you're supposed to have it 30 days before. I asked the judge to adjourn. He refused. In fact, I even asked to be accommodated because I have a toxic fume injury, and the new courthouse is a sick building. That's what a lot of the motions were from week to week. Oh, that doctor's note is not good enough. You better go get another one. On and on. You know, and looking for a hall that would be healthy. Like this here, it's not well, I don't know it's not affecting me, but if they had washed the carpet 5 days ago with some perfume detergent, I'd be in trouble. Anyway, the abuse in the family court system is endless. And who do we turn to? I sent all documents of perjury to the local Crown attorney, and he refuses to deal with it. Okay? And so, we're being abused by the system. And who do we go to for recourse? I phoned the OPP fraud unit in Aurelia about the fraud and perjury with the legal aid lawyers. And they said, oh, there's not enough fraud. Well, it's a funny thing. The Toronto Star did an article on Two Faces of Justice about all the lawyers in Ontario. And they did an audit, because they're not going to slander anyone. But they tallied up $61 million that was fraudulently taken from clients through wills, estates, real estate retainers, or real estate deposits, and I think retainers for fees. Of all those lawyers, the Law Society, who does their own discipline, and I call it Fox Theater, because I filed complaints against 2 lawyers with the Law Society, and that's all it is. It's foxes guarding the hen house. They're above the rule of law, okay? Of all those lawyers that amassed a total of $61 million, maybe a dozen were punished, and some were just in a house arrest. And did any of them ever pay back any of the millions of dollars stolen?
Sir, thanks so much for your comments.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, cut me off.
no,
Yeah,
no,
it's a little hard. Eh? It's hitting a little hard, right?
My jurisdiction is very limited with respect to this review. What I'm tasked with is dealing with police oversight bodies, the OIPRD, the SIU, and the OCPC. So, you know, that's what I'm limited to discuss tonight.
Okay, I didn't realize it was you, Justice Tulloch.
Yes.
And I was happy to hear that you're from the Court of Appeals. But you see what's happened when a person has no recourse.
Okay, I understand.
No recourse. He's not getting served by the police that are supposed to protect us. You know, I had death threats to be beaten and murdered 3 or 4 times. The police never investigated. Okay? Too much gender bias.
Did you have a chance to answer the questions at the table? Did your group? I think there was another gentleman that was sitting with you. Perhaps we could focus on those.
Actually, the 3 of us were telling the attorney and the other girl our stories, so it took up the full time period. But I made some notes. People trained in forensics would make good inspectors maybe for the SIU. You know, that's one avenue that they could look at. You know, it would help if they could balance the investigative team with people that have, you know, some years of experience in the forensics. It would really help. It would help alleviate that suspicion that possibly the investigators might be biased towards their brotherhood, former police officers. This has nothing to do with them, but through my experiences, some of the things I've shared, judges should go to judge school, okay? It should be separate from law school, because judges that were lawyers in their former life and then become judges They could be carrying lots of baggage and bias. And I know that's off the topic of the SIU, but I'll end it there. We actually did not have a chance to discuss the questions and answers, or what our answers should be.
Thank
Okay,
you very much.
thank you.
It's Dan, right? Is that your name, Dan?
Jerry.
Jerry? Sorry about that.
Thank you, sir.
Are there any other comments from the room before I call on Justice Tulloch to wrap up? Louis? Wally?
Can you
You need a
utilize
mic.
the
Right, yeah. I mean, regarding the collection of data and taking into consideration what I was saying earlier about the systemic nature of the problem, and it's not about necessarily bad apples because we're all impacted by it because of its nature. I think if, so taking that into consideration, and then we collect data about race and gender and age and mental health and so on, and referring to, the problems that we have, it might reproduce it in this case. It might reproduce it, I'm saying. Reproduce the systemic nature because then we zero in on specific people.
So I think it all depends on the usage of
On the usage of it. So, I mean, so without the awareness and education and so on, we might reproduce the very problem that we wanted to, do something about in the first place anyway. So that's something to be taken into consideration. And of course, we also discussed, within our table, between the members of our table, the issue of power too. Who has more power than whom, and how does this work? The element of power in the end, right? So that needs to be addressed as well. We did, I should say, I mean, we at Diversity Thunder Bay worked with the Thunder Bay Police for 4 years on institutional change, and we had good experience on the whole. So I mean, we reviewed the policy. We looked at the employment systems review. And as a result of what we've done, a training component emerged as well. And I think this is why I was saying earlier that the problem is quite complex. There's the good and the bad and in between. And of course, there are variations between how we respond, right? I mean, what do we do with the biases, for instance, that are embedded in the system, and as well as how do we, that we strive also towards doing a good job within democracy and so on, the elements and the ideals of democracy.
Thank you, Walid.
Go ahead. Ladies first.
So twice we've heard, let's have a level playing field. And I want to know how you have power for some and no power for others and call it a level playing field. It's like a little bit of insanity.
I did want to, no. Ladies first, I'm next. No, I forgot to mention, though, it would be nice, and I can always put it on your website, and that, is there any way of consolidating these oversight bodies under one director so the public doesn't have to try to figure out which one they have to contact? They have one director, one website, and have an intake officer, and they can direct the complaints. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Darius? Right.
Thank you. My name is Darius Ferris from Consultation First Nation. I'm a band council member for my community, and also the president for the Matawa Tribal Board here in Thunder Bay. I come from 9 First Nations that are under Matawa Tribal Council. First of all, since yesterday, I've learned a great deal of the people that shared about the concerns they have about First Nations in the city of Thunder Bay and different towns, such as where I come from, a town called Hearst, Ontario, and places like Timmins, Ontario, Sudbury. It's the same common issues and concerns that that people are facing here in Thunder Bay, but not as huge as Thunder Bay here. October 18, next month, I'm putting together a rally. We've went to the City Hall to get some papers to get a permit to have our rally in October 18. And it has nothing to do with create animosity or hate or bitterness against each other, but it's to have an awareness to the people of the city of Thunder Bay that not all First Nations are bad. Like I said before, I think the First Nations residing here in Thunder Bay, almost 100% of them are good people. Just a very small percentage of those people, you know, are gang-related and other stuff. But they're not perfect as well. You know, they need help like anybody else. And also that this is to bring people together, you know, and what can we do to improve the city of Thunder Bay as First Nations people. And I've been here long enough to, I don't live here, but I've come to the city many years, for about 30 years now, and it's always been the same issue. And when is it going to stop? I mean, I've been here for 30 years, and I've heard the same thing over and over again, and it seems like it's getting worse. You know, and Thunder Bay is a good city, as someone mentioned earlier. If I had to choose to move somewhere, I choose Thunder Bay. It's a nice place. And but you know, it's not the First Nations that are making your city look bad, as they say. The police that arrest our people. They tell them, go back to your community, you're making our city look bad. No, it's not. It's not the First Nations that make your city look bad, it's vice versa. It's the other way around. It's those that are in leadership, policing, security guards, that make your city look bad. And sad to say that that's the truth, you know, and I see a lot of this happening. And also there was this website, well, on Facebook. There's this Facebook page called, I think it's called Thunder Bay Dirty or something like that. I mean, who's this individual that's making your city look bad? Certainly not First Nations. This person taking pictures of First Nations in the streets, holding a bottle of whatever. And this individual is making Thunder Bay look bad. Not us. We bring millions and millions of dollars into your city, and yet this is how we're treated. You know, like a rough number, top of my head, I think like over 50 million of revenue comes into the city from First Nations. That's a lot of money. It all went up now, 400 million. That's a lot of money. It seems like the city is only after our money, our change. $1 billion by 2030. We're making guys rich while we suffer. You know, First Nations people come from isolated communities. They love their First Nation community. You know, the hunting, the trapping, the fishing, and all these activities that they do. And when we come to a city like this, especially with our kids that want to come with and fulfill their education, but instead they're being bullied. You know, people throwing things out of their car, teasing them with racial comments, and throwing knives at them and forks is what we've heard. Objects. And you have all kinds of a diversity of different culture and backgrounds, all walks of life here in the city of Thunder Bay. You know, you have the Chinese, the black people, the majority is white people. You got the there's a divide. There's a lot of people here with different walks of life, and it seems like it's only the First Nations that are being picked on. I could be wrong, but as far as I see things and hear things, it's First Nations. And I think this has to stop. You're making your city look bad. I know there's people that go out there drinking, doing drugs, committing crimes. But just because you see an innocent native walking around or in a mall or doing his or her thing, just enjoying life, doesn't mean that you have to pick on every one of them. Every race does that. People go out drinking. First Nations are considered the drunks of this nation. No. You go to a bar, there's the majority of people there that are drinking are white people. You go to a liquor store, the majority of people that go buy liquor is, a different race besides First Nation. So if you take a hard look at this, you can't point fingers. You can't judge other people's walk of life or their personal lives or things like that, of that nature. It's common sense. It's common sense, and I'm not sure about that person that created this website on Facebook has been stopped. I don't know, but and the last time I checked, it was still on Facebook. Nobody stood up and said, enough is enough. You're making our city look bad. I come from a First Nation community as a counselor where my job, along with my fellow counselors, my chief, is to improve the quality of life in our community. Not to point fingers and put people down. But we're there to make our community the best as possible. This summer alone, we upgraded our roads into. We got rid of the potholes. We pretty much it's not pavement. It's like this. Yeah, that exactly. And chief and council accomplished that for our people. We want what's best for them. And if you want to see the city improve, it's going to take the top people, the political leaders, everybody at that level to step up and make a difference. Simple as that. All the churches that we have here, they're supposed to. What's that saying? Live what they preach, And I think we need more involvement in that area as well. A lot of different affiliations and different beliefs of all sorts. Even traditional people, First Nations people, and that's going to make things, I'm sure, improve the city. May not solve all the issues, but we can improve a lot of things. So with that, I just want to share that and just let you know that October 18, we're going to have that rally, that walk. We're hoping that everybody will come together, not just First Nations, but everybody, all walks of life, white people, everybody, to say we can get along together, fine, But it's just these things that we gotta get rid of and stop, and there's this police brutality, and like the lawyer said, not all cops are bad. I believe that. I got some cops that are good friends of mine. They have good concerns and good ideas on how to better improve people, and I think that's the way it should be. As the portfolio holder of policing in my community, my job is to improve relations between the people and the police, and vice versa. So with that, I just want to thank you, and I have my cousin and I have 6 hours of driving to go. We're going to go home tonight, but don't forget October 18, we'll have it for sure, And I'm hoping that different chiefs and councils will get involved and participate in it. It's not to create anger and for people to drive by and throw things at us and slur racial remarks. It's not that. We just want to show the people that there are some good people out there, First Nations people, you know, and hopefully from there, with these meetings, you know, with all the investigations that's going on and the media, I just hope that things will improve and change for the better in the future of this the city, and that the city here will be the perfect example of other cities that are going through the same similar situations. You know, and that's pretty much it.
Thank you very
thank
much,
you.
Darius.
All right.
Appreciate that. Well, I'd just like to thank each and every one of you for the time and effort. I know it was a trek out here, and we appreciate you being here. But most importantly, we appreciate your candor and your openness to sharing your deepest thoughts and pains in many cases. And Justice Stellick will wrap up and give you his reflections. And thank you again. There's lots of food down the hall, just in case, to take with you on your long drive home, Darius.
Okay, so I want to thank each and every one of you again for coming out. I echo what Pamela has said. It's a big sacrifice that each of you have made. I've heard you very loudly and clearly. Darius, thank you for driving 6.5 hours to come and to meet with us. You know, not to single you out, because I think each and every one of you that are in this room, just being here is an effort and a sacrifice, and we certainly appreciate your presence. Each of us is an integral part of our community and our society, and I believe that each and every one of us have the potential and the ability to make a difference. And, you know, I've heard all of your recommendations. I've heard, you know, your views, and what I've heard is that there are diverse perspectives. Some people have experienced some very, very hurtful situations. Others have not. But, you know, each of your particular experiences are legitimate, and I can assure you that we will consider them, we will reflect on them, and each of your advice and recommendations will be reflected in the report at the end. And I am very hopeful that the end result will lead to a much better system. I'm hopeful that this will lead to some legislative changes that will make these institutions more reflective of the society in which we live, more transparent and more accountable, and that it will engender confidence in not only the police, but our society and our democracy as a whole. I don't believe that, you know, being an idealist. I absolutely believe that we as a society are capable of making the place that we live and the institutions and the people, our community, you know, better places. And just you being here is evidence of each of your willingness and your concern for your community. So again, I thank you for coming, and we'll be, you know, we'll be going to other parts of the north and other parts, like I said, of Ontario, to hear other views of ordinary citizens like yourselves, who will, in my view, shape in the report that we will be presenting to the government in March. So again, thanks so much.